Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you again for joining us for today's webinar, Community Solar, Can It Benefit Low and Moderate Income Pennsylvanians? Today's presenters are Liz Robinson and Ron Celentano. Liz is currently the Executive Director of the Philadelphia Solar Energy Association, a local nonprofit dedicated to expanding solar energy across the state. Prior to coming to PSEA, Liz founded and directed the Energy Coordinating Agency for more than 30 years. ECA provides energy efficiency, education, workforce development, home repair, and bill payment assistance services to thousands of low-income households every year. Liz also co-founded and directed the Keystone Energy Efficiency Alliance, the state's energy efficiency trade association. Ron is a solar energy industry consultant with Celentano Energy Services. He started working in the solar energy field over 40 years ago. His experience covers technical and policy-related fields. He has been involved with helping shape all of Pennsylvania's state laws and regulations in solar energy over the past 2 decades. Currently, he is the president of Pennsylvania Solar Energy Industries Association and Vice President of Mid-Atlantic Solar Energy Industries Association for Pennsylvania. He holds a BS in physics and an MS in the field of mechanical engineering. Thank you both again for joining us today, and I'll hand the presentation over to Liz.
Thanks so much, Colleen. It's really great to have the opportunity to share community solar with this audience. And I'll just jump right in. We're working on community solar for Pennsylvania through legislation. And let me first explain why we're doing this and what it is. So most of us are more familiar with rooftop solar, but unfortunately rooftop solar is not available, not accessible to roughly 70% of Pennsylvanians. So for example, you might have a roof with too much shade, you might rent instead of own, or you might simply not have access to capital. And this prevents many people across the state from using solar. And one solution to that is community solar. So the idea of community solar is that it's a much larger array, much larger system than rooftop. And it is therefore less expensive, so people can buy in or subscribe to a smaller portion of a large system at a very affordable cost. And community solar participants can be businesses, they can be residents, and they frankly can be anyone, any customer. So the advantage is there's much less upfront capital expense. You don't put the system on your own property, and you're able to subscribe at a much lower price. So it's a very simple structure. A very large solar array is usually built by a developer, a solar developer, and that developer might also administer the program, so he might actually send the bills. The utility is sending the bills to the customer, but he might be responsible for acquiring customers. We're hoping to make that a little bit more open in Pennsylvania so that utilities could also administer programs and they could acquire the customers. So we're hoping to create more of an open framework. As this slide shows, the community solar project generates its power, it sends it to the utility then bills the customer, and the amount of the subscription, the solar subscription, so the amount of generation that a customer has subscribed to is subtracted from their utility bill. So the bill, the actual bill, is for the total consumption, but the solar project is producing much of that. Could be 100% of that, could be less than 100%. It's up to the customer to decide how much solar they want. So it's a very simple arrangement. So again, the first step is a community solar project generates the power. Subscribers sign up in groups or individually directly to the subscriber or to an intermediary and administrator. And then the subscriber receives a bill from their local utility. And that reflects, the billing will reflect how much solar power they are credited with each month. And so it's very simple. It's very similar to having it on your own roof, but it's less expensive again, and there is no upfront cost necessarily. So again, the ownership of the system itself can be a developer, solar developer, and in Pennsylvania, people may not know this, but in Pennsylvania, utilities are not able to own a large solar array. They would work through a developer, a solar developer. So subscribers, again, can be anyone, an individual residential customer, a commercial customer, school, can be a multifamily building owner who is buying a subscription on behalf of all of their tenants. And then the subscribers can decide how much they want to purchase. Again, they can purchase up to 100% of their bill or a lower percentage. It's really up to the subscriber. And this last bullet here, the credit rate, the way this will be constructed in Pennsylvania, we believe, is full retail. In other words, the customer will benefit from our solar net metering regulations in Pennsylvania. So the customer will get the full retail benefit of the solar power. That's very important because that gives them the greatest value. So full net metering is built into this. And going back to the opening slide, the value, the real value of community solar, there are many, many values. So it gives everyone, every Pennsylvanian, access to solar energy. And as I said at the outset, about 70% of Pennsylvanians right now do not have access to solar. So this would open up solar to all of those other customers. It's going to be very simple, very straightforward to subscribe. You don't have to go through all the steps and headaches that you do with rooftop solar. It will also be set up to be flexible and portable. So if a customer were to move, so long as they remain in the same utility service territory, they would be able to keep their subscription. So in other words, unlike rooftop solar, when you move, you lose access to the system. Community solar will permit customers to maintain access to the system if they move within the same utility service area. And the fourth bullet here is a really important one, the economy of scale with a community solar project. Community solar, so it's very similar to many, many other services. Solar is less expensive as the system gets larger. So the size of a community solar project will bring the cost down even further. Solar is already very cheap, but it will bring it down even further. So it will provide access at a very low price. Customer choice, people are, this will open up more choice to customers. And very, very important in Pennsylvania, this will really spur job creation through renewable energy across the state. We believe that community solar will be built across the state, and it will be built in rural areas. It'll be built in suburban and urban areas. So it'll really open up job creation across the state in solar energy. And most importantly now, frankly, with climate change being such a present and urgent issue, it will open up a new way for the state to meet more ambitious environmental goals. Community solar is already in place in 17 states and the District of Columbia. We are seeing community solar grow very, very rapidly now across the country. It's relatively new. It's only about 6 or 7 years old. Started, I think, in Colorado, and it is really growing rapidly. It is a very, very straightforward and easy way to grow the solar industry. And Ron, I'm going to let you take it over from here.
Okay. Yeah, so a very important mechanism for community solar to work is, as Liz mentioned before, is net metering. And net metering is a financial or financing mechanism for solar in general. As you generate solar that may be a system that's on your roof, it offsets your electric bill at full retail value if you stay with your default electric supplier. So if I happen to size a system on my roof that generates enough electricity for my entire year of electric usage, I'll basically have not so much a zero bill. I still have my meter charge or my fixed $7 or $8 bill a month, but I'll basically offset all of that electric generation on my bill, if you will. So by allowing having the off-site, if you will, large array out there, you're able to still take advantage of that same net metering mechanism. And this slide is really showing something that comes out every year from solarpowerrocks.com, which rates basically overall the solar policy in each state. And I'm just identifying here the net metering part, and just to say that Pennsylvania has one of the highest net metering policies in the state. It ranks as A, I guess, and I'll give you the reasons for that. Did that not work? I'm not able to advance here. Oh, okay, there. Okay. There are three major things why Pennsylvania is really further up the ladder with how good net metering is in Pennsylvania. One is that a lot of states have the limits of the size of a system that can go on top of the roof or on their property, and usually it's more often based on the percentage of generation provides relative to your load. So like in New Jersey, for example, you can't have a system that generates more than 100% of your annual electric usage, or that you just don't get any value for that surplus that you may generate at the end of the year. In Pennsylvania, we're allowed to have a much higher, and particularly residential. We have it because we kind of had our net metering structure a long time ago. We kind of got it worked out a different way. And like you could of course have a large piece of property on your residential, your residential property, and you could put as large as a 50 kW system, which probably will make many times more electricity than you need for your annual usage. So you can really oversize the size of system on your property. The 3 megawatts would be for commercial businesses, and then there's a max of a 5 megawatt size system for microgrid or emergency type systems that's allowed in Pennsylvania. The other important thing is we don't have any aggregate cap of how many customers can participate in net metering. In some states, they may have up to 1% of all of the electric generation in the entire state. That's how many people could, or that's how many accounts could be eligible for applying for net metering. In Pennsylvania, we have no cap, so that it's still first come first serve, but it still allows. There's no cap that limits how many people can be participating in net metering. And the last thing is the net excess generation. At the end of the year, what happens in Pennsylvania is, or even in other states, you may generate more than you need, or more than the, you may generate more than you need with rooftop solar or whatever. And in some states, you may entirely lose whatever excess there is, any additional annual surplus you put out on the grid. You may get nothing back for that. Some states will give you avoided cost, or just maybe the wholesale rate. But in Pennsylvania, you're able to get the price to compare, which is actually a much higher rate. You don't get the distribution part of the bill, but you do get the price to compare part. So we're really up a lot further up that ladder with how much you can get even with your annual surplus. So these three things combined, that is what makes net metering really very favorable, particularly in Pennsylvania, and help facilitate why it could work well with community solar. Okay, that's how you do it. Okay, so we already have some of this. Part of how this works too is you need virtual net metering for community solar to work. So that means you could actually have a solar system that is installed off the property, and you still can benefit from the generation from it to offset your bill. And that's what virtual net metering is all about. And you need that in place for community solar to work. And several states do have that in place. In Pennsylvania, we have something called virtual meter aggregation, and it's not quite the same. It's partially there, but the limitations we have in our state currently is that you can have, like I could have two properties where I have my solar system on my particular property, and I have another property that might be, down the block from me, and I could oversize my system such that my excess can go off and offset the bill on my other property that I have. I'm allowed to do that. That is all within the rules of Pennsylvania. However, the limitations here are that all the accounts that do benefit from that surplus of solar generation, all those accounts have to be in the same name holder, have the same name under those accounts. It has all those other places, those accounts have to be within a 2-mile radius, and where the solar system is actually interconnected or installed has to be done so where there's already an existing load. So I can't go out into a field and plop in a big gigantic solar array there and tie it right into the electric line and be able to provide any kind of solar back to other accounts. So those are the three things that we have to basically open up with the community solar bill that we're working on right now. And that will then bring us to this first bullet of virtual net metering, then allowing for solar to be going out to other places within the whole entire service territory of a utility to different account holders, and they could all benefit from this net metering mechanism. This is really a virtual meter aggregation application. And it is sort of a limited community solar example. This is a project I worked on. I designed and oversaw the installation of this solar system on top of this passive home apartment building in Northern Liberties in Philadelphia. It's a 25-unit system. It's supposed to be a net zero system, although it's not really quite there. So this is kind of showing out how this, I don't know if you can see my mouse, maybe you can't. Anyway, so you have the array, it goes into several inverters that are on the roof, and it's interconnected right in between where the main electric panel is for the entire building and the electric meter that goes off to PECO. This is PECO's territory. There are 25 electric panels, each one for all the apartments that come off the main panel. So in this case, the landlord is they basically have sub-metering going on, so they are able to charge each of these apartments based on their electric usage with monitoring that they have. This is sort of an application where it's that total solar rate isn't going to each of the apartments, rather it's going to the entire building, and it's being parsed out accordingly to each of these apartment buildings, apartments. Another way that this could be done and is allowed is to do it this way, where when the building was constructed, instead of having a single meter for the entire building, you also have electric meters and accounts for each of the apartments. So I said this is 25 units. It would really be 25 plus one more, which is 26, which is that 26th one is representing all the common space in the building. So now what you can do in this case, you could have all the apartments be under the same account holder as the landlord. The landlord would receive 26 bills basically, and they're allowed to do that and have this solar, this one solar array, if you will, would be able to offset the bills in all of those accounts. So this is allowed right now. This happens to be an example of a community solar in the Pennsylvania microgrid that's at the Navy Yard. The Philadelphia Navy Yard is it's basically off-grid. It's not under the jurisdiction of the Pennsylvania Utility Commission, so it can really has a lot more freedom to do different things that they want to do. So they could really actually have community solar on their site as well as a microgrid. So there's like a local microgrid at the Navy Yard owned and operated by PIDC, and it's just, like I said, not subject to the rules of the PUC. Currently, there's a 425 kW solar PV system on the roof on one of the buildings, generating about 450 megawatt hours a year, and there's going to be a phase 2 of a larger system that's going to go into place. And so the system here, it's financed, installed, and maintained by SolarSense, which is also Alternative Energy Development Corp. Group. That is a Pennsylvania-owned company, financed by the Reinvestment Fund, and the power is sold to PIDC over a 15-year power purchase agreement. So they're going to have subscribers that are in the Navy Yard that are going to be participating in this, and they'll get their electricity at a lower rate than they normally would be otherwise. I want to just go into why some of this is all doable, and it's because of, just generally speaking, why the cost of solar has just plummeted in price. It's electronics. All electronics, as you probably know, once they start to gear up, like the cell phone, anything else, all these things tend to really, really drop in price after super volumetric production, and that's what's happened here. And this is kind of showing that. I have two graphs here, but the one up in the upper part is showing from about 2005 the price of solar at the metric is dollars per watt, and that's going to be a turnkey cost of the capacity, like wattage is the capacity of the size of a solar system. So it's $1 per watt, meaning however big the solar system is, it costs that much dollars to install it. And on the right column, the bars are showing the amount of installations in terms of capacity that's cumulative over time. So as you can see, as the capacity has been growing over time, there's been, of course, that greater volume of production of solar, and therefore the price has been dropping down. And this graph down below is really kind of showing more of a blow up from 2009 to current times, and it's pretty much has dropped about 70% in cost over the past 9 years. This is kind of demonstrating a little bit more of what Liz was talking about, how economies of scale. The larger systems tend to cost less than the smaller systems. So this is just showing a breakdown of, like, each of these bars is showing the breakdown of the pieces, like the module costs, the inverter costs, all the engineering costs, things like that, and the difference between 2016 and 2017. But the main thing I want to point out is the difference between the residential costs being about almost $3 a watt, and then the non-residential, which is really small and medium commercial, at about $1.75 a watt, and then the utility scale, where it's down well under about a little over the $1 a watt or so. So as these systems get bigger, the cost comes down overall, and then so a rooftop for me could be substantially more than, of course, what I could benefit from a community solar project. And this kind of demonstrates that even more. So what is shown here, really, you could say, if you look in the bottom chart here on the left side, we have a 5 megawatt size system, and it's showing $1.38 a watt. That might be the typical cost of putting in that size system for community solar. That's comparable to me putting something on my roof at maybe $3 a watt. So this is far less than half that cost. Doesn't mean that the subscriber gets it at half the cost, but at least allows for this to all work such that I may not have to put anything out really in order to benefit by having a system, buying a power purchase agreement through a community solar project. And lastly, I just want to talk about the difference between community solar versus clean energy choice. The clean energy choice, you may very well be aware of. As you know, you can choose your electric supplier right now. You can go on to the PUC's website and you can see the many choices of who you want to buy your electricity from. Of course, you still have to buy you still have to pay for your distribution part of your electric bill to your to the electric distribution company, whether it's PECO, PP&L, MEDED, whoever it might be. But the generation part, you can choose who you want that to be from, and you could also choose if you want to purchase from some of the third-party suppliers that have some kind of green tag, if you will. Maybe it's wind or solar, or it's a combination of renewable energy, and you could buy that. Maybe you're paying a little bit more for that tag, so you're really buying that package or bundled product. And there's maybe, I think I last heard was there's maybe about 37 choices out there that you could purchase that from. However, most all of those choices are picking up those renewable credits, if you will, from out of state, from somewhere else, and you're going to be paying more for that. I mean, you're still paying your bill for all the electricity that you're consuming. You're paying probably a little bit higher than you normally would in order to provide that that benefit. However, with community solar, I mean, it's a very different thing. Now you're purchasing the electricity from an off-site array, and you are basically buying that electricity at some rate that could very well be less than what you might be paying for that with your default supplier. But the distribution part of that bill is actually being net metered. So you're actually paying less because that part is going to be offset entirely from the electricity, and you're getting full retail value for that part of the bill. And I think I'm up to you, Liz.
Great. Thanks, Ron. So we're going to talk a little bit more in detail about low and moderate income, and how we can make this work, how it can benefit. So currently, in most environments, well, in Pennsylvania, I'll just say, the only public subsidy for solar is the federal tax credit. And right now that's 30%. So if you are installing a solar system on your own home, you can either pay in cash or you can borrow money to do that. And if you own that system, you can apply for your federal tax credit of 30%. The problem with that for low-income people, to be frank, is first you have to own your home. So all low-income people who rent are automatically disqualified. And then you have to have the money in hand or the credit to be able to carry the cost of the system. And a lot of low-income customers simply, frankly, don't have that. And frankly, the other issue is you got to have a good roof. So if your roof is crummy, you don't want to put an expensive solar system on that. So we don't see very many low-income people participating in rooftop programs. For example, the city of Philadelphia just ran a very, very successful solarized program, which is really an awesome program, but it had very few low-income participants, and that's very typical of solarized programs. They tend to, the people who participate tend to be people who own their homes with money. So the current structure of solar programs really does not permit any participation, any meaningful participation by low and moderate income customers. So in working on this community solar, we tried to figure out how to create real value. And real value means the bill is going to be lower. So we did some modeling, and I'm very pleased to be able to say that for the PICO service territory, we haven't completed everyone across the state yet, but we started on the east side. So for the PICO service territory, community solar can be easily produced at less than PICO's current default price. And that's just absolutely key. So I kind of jumped ahead here. Let me actually, I'm going to go back to price after I complete this. I also want to just mention that maintenance is a very, very modest issue. The quality, Ron was saying that the cost of solar has come down precipitously, and along with the cost coming down, we've seen the quality go up. So the quality of these components, the quality of the modules, the inverters, all of the components in a solar system are much better than they used to be. And for that reason, the maintenance is much lower. So you can't ever say anything is maintenance free, but solar is getting close to that. The issue of the subscription is just that. So if you move or stop paying, or God forbid you die, you don't have any obligations. So it's much more flexible. Community solar is much more flexible than rooftop solar. And in a large system, the credit risk to the owner of the system is going to be spread across all of the subscribers, and there's very little risk of non-payment. So the risk to the owner is very low. So what we're working through in this effort is a structure that will guarantee that the community solar project is produced at a price at or below default, so that there would be an actual financial saving for the subscriber. And we're confident that we can see that happen in Pennsylvania. Not to say that every system will be there, but it is certainly possible. And what we're looking at in that is for low-income customers who are currently recipients of the Customer Assistance Program, the CAP program in PA, that they could simply have their CAP portion, their monthly CAP subsidy, if you will, purchasing for them solar, so that the utility would essentially shift the supply. If the customer chooses, the utility would shift the supply to that customer from conventional power to solar. So it would be an option for a CAP customer to say, yes, I want to be solar. I want to go solar. And so there would be no other change for them. They would simply remain on the CAP program, but be able to go to solar. And this customers could also, in some states, the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program, the LIHEAP program, is being used to support solar. That's certainly possible in Pennsylvania. So we're looking at existing low-income programs being compatible and being used for community solar. Another really major issue, which is very timely, is that solar is not only very inexpensive now, but the price of solar is very stable. So in other words, once it's constructed, the price remains pretty flat. So you're not subjected, and you could have a subscription with a community solar system that would last for 30 years. The system itself would last for 30 years. So you would not be subject to annual price increases or the worry about annual price increases. And that's really very, very important for low and moderate income people. So price stability will be greater with solar than it will be with other sources of supply. And we're also working on a construct where the utility itself can be the administrator of a community solar program. And the benefit there is the customer already knows the utility and would maintain their relationship with the utility, and the utility, frankly, has access to all the customer data, and it would be just simply easier and probably less expensive to have the utilities play the role of program administrator. We're not going to require that, but we'd like to permit that so that it could be done if the utility is interested in playing that role. So where we are, our next steps in Pennsylvania are to pass legislation that would authorize community solar statewide. And to do that, we're working on building broad stakeholder support. This is already supported very, very broadly across the state. So we've had great bipartisan support in both the House and Senate. And we're seeing a tremendous level of interest in community solar. And then we're doing more public education, just like this webinar today, so that more and more people understand what community solar is. And we want to do that in advance of the bill passing, so that once the bill passes, which we hope will be this year, there will be pent-up demand, if you will, and we'll be able to get community solar projects in place across the state quickly and build up the subscriber base. So public education is a really important part of this. Here are some really excellent resources that we've used, and I would recommend anybody who's really interested in getting into the weeds. All of these are sources of tremendous amount of information. So we thank you, and I think we're ready for questions.
Great. Thank you, Liz and Ron. We are going to open up for questions. So if you have any questions, please feel free to unmute your phone by pressing *7. You can also type your question in the chat box, and that will allow you to type in your question there, and I can read it out loud. So if anybody has any questions, please press *7. Yes? Is there a question out there?
Yes. Is this PowerPoint available? Will it be sent out?
Yes, we'll send out a recording of the webinar as well as the slides early next week.
Okay, that'll be fine. And I appreciate the contact information, and look forward to talking to someone again soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody have any other questions?
Yes.
Sure. If you want to ask your question.
Under the, I believe it's the aggregate metering program, the one that is currently authorized, just wanted to run a hypothetical by you. Let's say you had an organization that maybe owned a few apartment buildings within the 2-mile radius. If they were able to place all of the electric accounts in the same name, say the property manager's name, which would be common across those properties, is that sufficient then to take advantage of the aggregate metering?
Yes. Yeah, that is true. So as long as let me see, you would and you could even do it as a power purchase agreement too. So you could even have a third party come in and install that array and sell the electricity to all those apartments, as long as the system isn't isn't any more than 110% more than the entire usage of all those. And obviously, you're not going to put something bigger than you need. So, but in either case, yes, that kind of application is allowed today.
Thank you. I have another question if no one else has availability.
We do have a couple questions, but go ahead and ask yours.
In terms of financing for this, I've seen solar investment opportunities marketed to financial institutions with CRA credit. Is there thought of how financing opportunities could be structured under this community solar such that banks could receive CRA credit and thereby be incented to, provide perhaps more advantageous financing?
I don't know that one. Liz, do you know?
I don't know. I just wanted to add to your earlier question. Nonprofits currently usually do not have the tax appetite to benefit from the federal tax credit. And when Ron mentioned the power purchase agreement and a third-party developer building and owning the system and selling that power to the multifamily building owner, that's done in order to take advantage of the tax credit. So the tax credit right now is the is the largest subsidy for solar. So it is important to try to build that into the calculation of the cost and the financing. But if you want to send Ron and I your question and your email, we'll get back to you with the CRA credit answer. That's a good one. And the Reinvestment Fund has done a lot of financing of solar projects at scale, and there are many other folks who would have that answer for you. So we can get back to you with that.
Thank you very much. This is a great presentation.
I should also add that there's another option that's coming up. It's called commercial PACE. It's basically a mechanism that's going to be out there that basically it can go through property tax. So you're borrowing the money and paying it back through property tax. So again, depending on how things are structured, that's another way that a solar application could be utilized. I see. Okay, go ahead.
I just want to say the commercial PACE guidelines are coming out very soon, so be on the lookout for that at the Sustainable Energy Fund website.
I'm looking at the questions here, and I see someone asking about how can solar installation companies best support the bill. You'll be hearing about that hopefully soon. I mean, I represent the trade association, Pennsylvania TACA. Always like to get more members so that you're more in front of what's going on. I don't know if the companies you're speaking of are members, but as we start to get this bill shaped up for its next introduction next year, we will be definitely reaching out to as many advocates to take an important role for helping us push this bill through.
Great, and there is another question from Anna. She says, who is currently allowed to build community solar? I'm in central PA and we have a scattered site housing land trust, but I'm confused about whether this is something we can currently do or do we need to wait for this legislation to pass?
Yes, there's two things. I mean, we do. It depends on what your setup is. It's possible that you could take advantage of it now, but we've really been talking mostly about that. There's a legislation has to be passed in order for it to be as available as we like it to be for everyone throughout Pennsylvania. But if your situation is such that there's the same ownership in the accounts across several of the locations of where those accounts are in place, and you could have a large solar array in one of those places, then and it's within a 2-mile radius, then it's possible to take advantage of what we already have in place under the virtual meter aggregation.
Yeah, I just want to stress with virtual meter aggregation right now, the meter the account name has to be exactly the same. So all the accounts within that 2-mile radius that you would like to support have to be in exactly the same name. And if it's a land trust and it's a scattered site situation, it's probably not likely that the accounts are in the same name.
I should add there's no limit to how many, by the way, of those secondary accounts you have. There's never been a limit out there, so you could technically have 100 little sites all over the place, so they could all fall within that virtual meter aggregation.
Mm-hmm.
Great. And Anna also asked if you could share the CRA questions and answers. So if you're able to provide that information to me, I can send that out to everybody that's on the call.
Sure, we'll do that.
And I do see, Frederick, you have your hand raised. Oh, here we go. Frederick asks, I know that Philadelphia City Council is considering an arrangement to buy power from a solar array to build in Adams County. How is this possible since the array is outside PECO's area?
So this is a very unusual concept, and it's a very exciting one because, and I have to say, it is not really a community solar application or situation. What is unique about that particular project is that Community Energy, who is both a developer of large grid scale solar as well as wind. They put in many megawatts of solar in Colorado and Maryland and all over the place. They are also an EGS. They are also an electric supplier. So you can go up, as I mentioned before, through electric choice, and you could choose Community Solar to be your electricity supplier and your bill.
Community Energy.
Bill.
Sorry.
Community Energy. I'm sorry. Community Energy. Sorry. Yes, that's right. I always mix those terms up. So you could purchase from Community Energy that electric supply from them. So because they kind of cover both ends of that, they've worked out. They won this through this RFP process that they're going to be installing the 70 megawatt largest system, 7 times larger than any other system we have in Pennsylvania right now in Adams County, and as a grid supplier, and they're putting that out on the grid. But at the other end of it, they're able to sell all that electricity to the city where they have chosen, Community Energy as their electric supplier, and they're buying it then at the 4.9 cents, I believe it is, per kWh. So that's how they're able to work that out.
And just for folks who might not be familiar with that, the city is purchasing, I think it's 22% of its electricity through this arrangement at no additional cost. So they are not paying any premium for solar energy. This is part of the city's long-term plan to really go very heavily into renewable energy. And this is a model, frankly, that we hope many other municipalities will use. This is a marvelous example of how to quickly change your electricity supply and go green at no additional cost.
Great. We do have about a couple more minutes for any more additional questions, so please add them to the chat box, or you can press *7 to unmute your phone.
While we're waiting for a question, I should have said that community solar is a model that permits an existing community to join together. So this could be a neighborhood, it could be a religious community, it could be any definition of a community, to join together and jointly acquire solar power as a group. So it can be, of any size, and it could be anywhere in the state. So it is, the group could come first and negotiate with a supplier or a solar developer to build a community solar array for them, or the array could be built first, the system could be built first, and then the subscribers are recruited. So it can be either way. It's a very flexible model.
And it tends to be a little bit more economically beneficial to the residential account holder because their rates are much higher than on a per kWh basis than a commercial customer. I mean, we're maybe paying whatever 10 to 14 to I don't know what we're up to 15 I don't know cents a kWh as a residential customer, but in the commercial arena, it's far less. It's maybe in that sort of that 6 cents per kWh, and then you pay a demand charge, which is another part of the bill that the solar, from a community solar perspective, may not help. In fact, it won't be able to help offset that part of the bill. So you don't get as much of a value on a commercial general service account, but certainly it's more so on the residential.
Great. I don't see any more questions. Does anybody have any questions out there? You can press *7. All right. If there are no more questions, I want to thank Ron and Liz again and everybody for joining today's webinar. Again, the webinar recording and the slides will be sent out early next week. Thank you both again, and everybody have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.